take off. So, hello everyone again. Before we go into the actual topic, we need to talk about a less fun topic in medical affairs. Because there's a concept that's called moral injury, and that happens when you watch really painful events and you get the feeling you cannot do anything about it. And we live in a world where this happens almost on a daily basis right now. There are people being denied access to food, water, essential medicines, and even almost every day we are watching on our screens bombs being dropped on men, women, and children. And at least I feel I can do much about it. So this causes this kind of feeling of moral injury, broken heart. And I don't always just hope that someone would at least mention it when you go to work or you speak at conferences. So today I'm doing it, and if you are also broken hearted by it, you're not alone. That's all I want to say before we go into the topic. Thank you very much. Now we can. So let's talk about medical affairs becoming a form of moving from a support function to actually a leader. You already touched this a bit in the previous panel conversation, but I want to dive a little bit deeper now. And this is a topic that's discussed at least once at every conference, so I know it might be boring, or you might think it's getting boring, but I promise this is a bit different because you will see very actionable steps that you can take in your organization to step up as a medical affairs organization, actually lead. And I will answer the question, what does it concretely take to become a leader? I will also show some best practices, some benchmarking in the industry, and show what different companies are going to do. And I hope you will walk home with a very clear understanding of what steps you can take to advance to a leader in medical affairs in your organization. So let's first start with this picture that probably all of you know. It's from McKinsey 5 or 6 years ago, proposing that we, as medical affairs, are now becoming a third strategic pillar in the organization. I just want to quickly raise your hands. Who thinks that your organization is already there and has medical affairs as a pillar? See, 1 hand, 2, 3, 4, 5. More than I thought. More than I thought, to be honest. But let's look at some data. Just a few data points. So in the years from 2014 to 2018, we saw an increase of MSL team size by 9%, and the ratio of sales reps to MSLs reduced from 10 to 1 to 8 to 1, meaning MSL teams are getting bigger relative to sales reps. So it seems like, yes, medical became more important in the organization, but between 2018 and now, this was more or less stagnant. We still had 8 to 1 ratio today. The spending for medical affairs has remained flat over the past couple of years, and in terms of spending to revenue, it even decreased by 20% in the last 5 years. So where are we going with medical affairs? And if you look at specific company examples, this is not on the slide, but tell you that there are companies who are moving medical affairs back to commercial. For example, Merck and Astellas are doing this. And we have companies like Novartis, who has been really a leader in terms of medical affairs excellence, basically pulled back from medical, has turned away from impact metrics, and has now introduced again a target of 300 MSL visits per year. So, and one other example is Roche, for example, famously introducing healthcare system partners, patient journey partners as new innovative goals to drive engagement above brand. And this also has been pulled back in a significant way. So that's really mixed data in my opinion, and it's a bit terrifying as well, because as we heard a lot already today, the relevance, the need for strong medical affairs is actually getting bigger with the complexity in the market. So let's look at this for a moment. Just to remind everyone what medical affairs is about, it's an essential function to translate science into clinical practice. Because if you don't do it, only 14% of published evidence actually translated into practice, meaning 17 years on average before an innovation actually reaches patients in a broad adoption. And patients are waiting. We're talking about really life-saving innovations and medicines that are not reaching the patient. And it's getting even worse if we look at the US, for example, with an increasing healthcare system cost burden and introducing IRA 2 or 3 years ago, practically shrinking the economic window, making it even more urgent that we accelerate adoption of our medicines. And you all heard the executive order last week, which is again exacerbating this development, partly due to the increasing complexity in the market, where in the last 10 years the number of assets available for a patient or physician increased by 75%, making it just much more complex for a pharmaceutical organization to operate in the market. So the relevance and the need for medical affairs is just always increasing. And just one last wake-up call before we go into the solutions. What happens if it really goes wrong? This is I didn't want to call names here, but it's a well-known example. A heart failure drug launched in 2014, which targeted more than 5 million eligible patients in the US alone. 1.5 years after launch, only just above 2,000 patients initiated treatment, which is less than 3%. And what happened? Why wasn't it successful? The market was not developed appropriately before launch. Patients had to incur high out-of-pocket costs. The physicians didn't want to switch stable patients due to lack of evidence, and the payers didn't want to pay the high cost of the drug versus the existing standard of care. So it took the company a couple of years to turn the ship around and actually achieve uptake in clinical adoption because, for example, they launched 40 new studies, they had reimbursement deals with payers, and other initiatives they implemented. But really it took them almost 10 years to actually achieve a significant clinical adoption. So we need to learn from these examples, because what I forgot to mention is the data of this product was really, really good. So in terms of clinical evidence, it was definitely the better option, but it was just the other arguments that were not addressed, the other stakeholder needs that were not addressed early before launch. So we need to learn from that, and registration is not sufficient. We need appropriate market development, and who can lead that, especially pre-launch? In my opinion, it's medical affairs. And one area where medical affairs can really take on leadership. So what does it take to become a strategic leader of an organization? I believe I read almost all the papers that are out there on this topic, and there are a number of really important nuggets in there, but what I'm always missing is the very clear and concrete statement of what it takes, and we will investigate this today and find together a real answer. And we start with our objective, which is, at least I believe, we want to accelerate getting drugs into the hands of the patients faster. We want to achieve the green curve here. And what does it take to get to the green curve? We need to work before the launch and develop the market so that at launch, patients and HCPs can receive the innovation. That's the theory behind it, and if you plot it on a chart, it can look like this, that you, for example, you try to increase your treatment rate, and this is well diagnostic, obviously, because it's just getting the patient on the appropriate diagnosis and on the appropriate guideline-directed therapy. And you can start doing this before launch, let's say, for example, phase 2 and 3, when you build your medical teams and start working on expanding the patient funnel. And then once you launch, your innovation falls into a place, into a market where it's already able to receive it, and you have a much faster uptake than without the market development. And when it comes to who leads in which area, I like the statement in the beginning of the day, fluid leadership. I think it's a good one, and we need always to have cross-functional collaboration, because none of this can be done by one function alone. But we can have a function leading in different time frames, and especially pre-launch in the zone between phase 2 and the launch, we propose that medical can very much take the lead for this cross-functional collaboration, because first of all, medical owns the data. It's necessary. Medical can understand the science and address stakeholder needs. Medical has resources pre-launch, it's also an important one. And it's also a matter of, if you want to become leader, then put a stake in the ground and take accountability for something. And it's an opportunity for medical to do that, actually become leader by owning this kind of market development before launch. So let's break it down very concretely. If you want to become a leader, a strategic leader, next to the behemoths R&D and commercial, where R&D is very clearly responsible for the registration and commercial is accountable for the sales, you need to have accountability for something that is on equal level. You cannot just remain at the level of collecting insights, organizing congresses, and doing R&D. It needs to be something very critical for the organizational success. And what can this metric be? Let's explore a few options. So, what medical affairs started to do is measuring activities in tactics, like number of engagements, percentage of face-to-face visits, and these kind of things. We also started measuring change in awareness, change in behaviors, which is often measured by surveys, which leads to this being more of a soft subjective measure. The current state of the art in the industry, at least in my opinion, is to measure change in actual clinical practice, meaning do you change actual diagnosis rates, do you change treatment rates, do you change referral rates, and this can be measured objectively with electronic health records, claims data, and similar data sources. And there are companies doing it. Shout out to Novartis, who have developed the concept of target population outputs, which is often called abbreviated as TPOs. Roche is also focusing on expanding the patient funnel, as I mentioned already, with some innovative new roles. And GSK is doing also something similar. They call it medical unmet needs. It's a concept co-created with McKinsey. But it's also all going into the same direction. You want to measure objectively clinical practice data. You could even go beyond that and measure clinical outcomes. Reduced in hospitalization, reduced death, or other clinical outcomes, which Novo Nordisk is doing by publicly stating the ambition of reducing obesity by 45%, or AstraZeneca with the statement of reducing the numbers with kidney failure by 20%. Well, a company is doing this, and you could even take it one step further and focus on healthcare system outcomes, for example, healthcare system expenditure, and then you are in the area of value-based contracts, outcomes-based contracts, which also many companies do here, Engine and Spark Therapeutics, just as a few examples. The question now comes, what is actionable of all of these metrics? And the problem with the right-hand side of the yellow matrix is that it takes more than 1 year to actually see a change. So you cannot really use it to course-correct during a year and steer your business. But with the clinical practice measures, you can. You can see a change usually on a quarterly basis, and this allows you to course-correct, change your tactics, redirect resources to different health systems, for example. And that's why this little metric is really the current state of the art and our proposal for what medical affairs should target. Back to this chart, the answer is what should medical affairs take accountability for? It's exactly that. Bringing patients on appropriate treatment and on the appropriate diagnosis to get them the drugs into their hands as fast as possible. And with this external outcome, you can elevate your function, your medical affairs function in your organization on equal footing versus commercial and R&D. Because if you take accountability for that, this is important enough to allow you to resit at the table and be part of those strategic decisions. But accountability means, obviously, you need to measure it and you need to take the fall if you don't reach the targets, right? So it's a bold statement. It requires leadership to take the stake, put the stake in the ground, actually hold yourself accountable for it. Quick introduction here. If you want to do this yourself in the organization, you can work with the target population outputs, the TPOs concept. It's a concept, if you're one of the people who only believe stuff that is published. It is published together with Pharma. This was co-created with Novartis originally. It was presented and discussed at the World Economic Forum 2 years ago. And it's presented at many other forums as well. For example, at MAPS was also discussed in both the US and EMEA this year. So feel free to look it up, and if you have questions, also always feel free to reach out to me, because I think if we embrace this concept together as an industry, it just helps the patient in the end, because this is really accelerating patient outcomes and patient access to treatment, because it allows us to put the patient on treatment, on the appropriate treatment faster. All right, coming to the last slide. If we, as medical affairs, embrace this concept and take ownership for changing clinical practice, what kind of skills and capabilities do we need in the future? We come from history where we really focus on scientific expertise. Medical medicine has always been the scientific conscience, and we focus on objective dissemination of science. This will still be important, of course, but it's not everything. It's not everything that will help us actually make a change in clinical practice. We need competencies and skills that were mentioned today before. We need to be agile, to learn, we need to have business acumen, we need to be able to think in systems what are changes in the healthcare system. I need to understand what the Inflation Reduction Act means and what does it mean to have a healthcare system burden that is really limiting my access and shrinking my economic window. We need to understand AI and how can I implement it to drive clinical adoption. All of these skills will be necessary in the future organization. So much more sophisticated and broad profile that we are going to that we need to hire, and we cannot rely on scientific expertise alone. And this brings me to a closing quote that I want to mention. It's actually from a colleague from ZS. Today, pharmaceutical organizations have Ferrari in their multi-car garage, medical affairs, and they are driving into the grocery shopping. My interpretation of the statement is that we actually right now we have really very sophisticated trained scientific experts in medical affairs, and we are using them to do MLR, to organize congresses, collect insights. But what if we would use them to actually work with healthcare systems, work in partnerships with KOLs, with EOLs, as we heard earlier today, to actually address the most pertinent unmet needs in the patient journey? What if we could actually help broaden the patient funnel and get more and more patients diagnosed and treated even before launch? This would really elevate the function, activate the capital that you have in your medical affairs organization already, and leverage into the most impactful purpose. So if you wanna still use your Ferrari to go grocery shopping and use your MSL, use medical organization for collecting insights and radio presentations, then feel free to do so. But if you wanna actually make an impact and change clinical practice and change patient outcomes, then meet me at the racetrack. Thank you so much.